Alrighty, the Dark Prophecy. This is the second book in the Trials of Apollo series, and it takes place 6 weeks after the events of the Hidden Oracle with Apollo, Calypso, Leo, and Festus in Indiana. They land in Indianapolis and are almost immediately attacked by monsters, because of course they are. The monsters chase them into the alley where they meet a headless ghost who's wearing orange. That is definitely plot relevant. Said ghost leads them to this woman named Hemithia, also known as Emmy, who saves them from the monsters, and then it leads them to this place called the Way Station. The Way Station is basically this refuge for demigods, satyrs, hunters, etc., and it is run by Emmy and Joe, two ex-hunters of Artemis who gave up immortality to be together. Yes, they are lesbians, Your Honor. Now, the ghost that led them to Emmy is actually Agamethus, the half-brother of Trophonius, the spirit of the oracle they're currently trying to rescue from Triumvirate, who is also Apollo's son. And the reason Agamethus is headless is because Trophonius cut off his head. I will back up. Basically, they tried to rob this king, and Agamethus ended up in a trap, and he told Trophonius to cut off his head. Trophonius begged Apollo to take him instead of Agamethus. Apollo didn't listen, and so Trophonius had to cut off Agamethus' head, and needless to say, Trophonius holds a grudge against Apollo because of this. Now, the reason that they were led to the Way Station is actually because the Emperor has been trying to find the Way Station for a long time, because the Way Station is on a need-to-know basis. It's very hard to find. Apollo didn't even know it existed until this very moment, but because the Emperor had been unable to find the Way Station, he decided that he would just start kidnapping the inhabitants. One of the inhabitants being Joe and Emmy's 7-year-old adoptive daughter, Georgie. Georgie believed that the only way to rescue the kidnapped inhabitants was to receive a prophecy, so she went and did that. But the problem with doing that with this oracle is that the way it works is it will give you a prophecy, and the only way to extract it is to use the Throne of Memory. And if you don't, you'll basically be driven insane by the visions that the oracle shows you. Problem is that the Emperor took the Throne of Memory, so when Georgie went searching for the Throne of Memory, she was instead kidnapped by the Emperor. After they find this out, they are visited by the goddess Britamartis, who gives Apollo and Calypso a quest to rescue these two griffins. These two griffins are among some of the kidnapped inhabitants. Before they leave on this quest, Apollo has a dream where he finds out that the Emperor they're facing is Comet, one of his former lovers, who he's also responsible for killing. Yeah, a common theme in this book series is just Apollo dealing with his past. Anyway, Calypso and Apollo go to the zoo because that's where the griffins are being kept, and they're confronted by Lytrices, which if you guys don't remember who Lytrices is, he is the son of Demeter and Midas. He was first introduced in the Riordan verse in The Lost Hero. They are rescued from Lytrices by Meg, and so when they return to the Way Station, they return not only with the griffins, but with Meg as well. Now, in return for saving the griffins, Britamartis gives Apollo the location of the Emperor's palace where the inhabitants of the Way Station and the Throne of Memory are being kept. They set out to Commodus's palace, they rescue the inhabitants, and retrieve the Throne of Memory. They also end up stumbling into the arena where Commodus is having this dress rehearsal for this thing he's doing called the naming ceremony. He's planning on renaming Indianapolis after himself, and at this dress rehearsal for the naming ceremony, Commodus informs them that he received a prophecy from the oracle saying that he needs to destroy the Way Station before he rechristens the city. He plans on rechristening the city the next day, so he's gonna destroy the Way Station first thing in the morning the next day. When they escape this, they return to the Way Station, not only with the rescued inhabitants, but as well as the hunters of Artemis and Lytrices, who decided to betray Commodus after Commodus tried to kill him. Back at the Way Station, they place Georgie on the Throne of Memory, where instead of receiving a prophecy, they receive a message from Trophonius to Apollo. He says that Apollo needs to receive a prophecy from the Dark Oracle, and either the prophecy he receives or Commodus's prophecy will come true, but not both. He also calls Georgie his little sister, implying that Georgie is Apollo's daughter, but Apollo is unable to remember whether or not she is, and at the end of the day, we never actually find out whether or not she is. So the next morning, Apollo and Meg go and find the cave of Trophonius. Now, another little thing about this oracle is that the best way to prepare your mind for it is to drink from the spring of Mnemosyne, the spring of memory, and Lethe, the spring of forgetfulness. In theory, they'll counteract each other and prepare your mind for the oracle, but Apollo does this and it makes him a little bit loopy. Like, there's an entire conversation about honey cakes. Apparently they needed honey cakes for the snakes that Apollo never mentioned, and Meg has to tell Apollo several times that A, he never mentioned honey cakes, B, he never mentioned snakes, and C, neither of them have honey cakes. Now, the oracle is on a little island underground surrounded by water, and the water is filled with snakes, and Apollo decides to just jump into it. Same. Now, Meg tells him to sing so that the snakes won't attack him, but Apollo doesn't listen soon enough, so Meg starts singing. But the problem is that Meg started singing about her pain, which made her mind vulnerable to the oracle. So the cave amplified her pain, which scared away the snakes, but then Trophonius decided to take her as his practitioner. Apollo, fearing for her sanity, begged Trophonius to take him instead. Sound familiar? Yeah. So instead of doing that, Trophonius tricks Apollo into promising to grant him one wish and gives the prophecy to Meg. The request Trophonius had was for Apollo to destroy the cave, and having no other choice, Apollo returns to the surface with an unconscious Meg, where there are 3 monsters there who already had an explosive. So he tricked one of them into going and blowing up the cave, and then the other 2 almost killed him, but then he was rescued by 3 Carpoi, which are grain spirits. One of the Carpos being Peaches, a friend of Meg's, who she can summon at will. These Carpoi also drove Meg and Apollo back to the way station. How they operated the vehicle, they don't really specify. When they return to the way station, it is mid-battle. Apollo goes in and finds Commodus, and he actually runs Commodus out of Indianapolis by showing his true godly form and blinding him. And then Leo and Lytrices tricked him into jumping out a window. This also ends the battle, so they bring Meg in, place her on the throne of memory. The prophecy they are given is in the form of a Shakespearean sonnet, which apparently is really bad. What they're able to determine from the prophecy is that Camp Jupiter is going to be attacked in 5 days, and since all forms of communication are down, they're unable to warn Camp Jupiter of this without physically being there, so Leo volunteers to do a solo journey on Festus to Camp Jupiter. They conclude that the third emperor is somewhere in the American Southwest, and that they'll have to get there through the labyrinth. The next oracle they need to restore is the Erythraean Sibyl. They will have a satyr accompanying them on their quest, and once this quest is complete, Meg and Apollo can go to Camp Jupiter, where Apollo will find the path to regaining his immortality. Now the next day, Meg summons Grover to be the satyr to guide them through their quest in the labyrinth. And that is where the second book ends.